Whether you're managing Real Madrid in the elite stratas of European competitions or Real Madrid in the lower divisions of Nicaragua, scouting and recruitment are going to form the backbone of all of your success. So it's important to have a plethora of strategies with which to find players, and more importantly, strategies that can apply to a club at your level. So if you're looking for a Galactico or trying to find the next Mbappe before his voice is even broken, I've got you covered. And if you're just looking for a player who can run and shoot in a straight line to lead you to glory in the Nicaraguan second division, then don't worry, you're in safe hands here too. Legitimately, if this wasn't recorded, I wouldn't believe myself here. He's 6'3" and has 16 sorry, he's from Vanuatu. Apologies, this video has taken a little longer than I would have liked. With FM being in such a state of flux at the moment, I wanted to make sure that all the methods I talk about actually worked and to give myself a chance to test some of the new stuff in the game this year. So before we move on to the methods, first, a little bit of housekeeping and good practice. Almost all of my scouting tests have been conducted using my optimized game setup. I'll put a link in the description where you can learn more about that should you want to, but the long story short is more players loaded equals more chance of finding a wonder kid hiding in Burkina Faso. And all these methods are simply things that you can do, not that you have to do. It's a single player game. Do what you like. Any of the views that I use in this video, be it database, shortlist, screen, national team, and club team views, will all be available in a big pack, also linked in the description. Grab that, unzip it, and just throw it in here. Then import at your leisure. This guide also assumes that you will be using attribute masking, which means the players that you've not got scouted will look like this instead of this. But I do have a mini section just for the attribute unmasked enjoyers. I bet you have the big light on in the living room too. You'll also want to set up your advanced scouting inbox settings before we crack on with any of the actual scouting stuff. To find those, you want to go into your player recommendations, then up to the big old cog up here, and you will find this menu. It looks very different to how it used to. But crucially, I find it's important just to send everything into recruitment and not have it going into messages. Now, because it's 26 and things just happen, sometimes they'll just go into messages anyway. I like to have it set up with 1 week and 1 month. I find that's reasonable, and that's the default anyway. And as good as it would be if these were actually proper defaults, they're not really, and they only apply in specific settings, so you mostly could just leave these blank too and decide on the fly. But having them set like this will stop you being crushed under a mountain of text from your chief scout. But there is something quite important missing, and that is that in a predictable but sad turn of events, the lovely little setting that you used to be able to turn off, which would prevent you from getting scout reports saying that they'd started the scout report, seems to be noticeably absent. Status update. Nothing. So either that screen doesn't exist anymore or it's buried somewhere underneath my Chief Scout's text. I've used chapters in this video, so you should be able to skip around to your heart's content to find the exact scouting methods that you are looking for, because what is viewer retention anyway? The final pre-flight check before takeoff is that all of this information, to the best of my knowledge, is correct at the time of recording. But with FM changing more frequently than a chameleon in a bag of Skittles, who knows? I've tried my best to show how things should work, as well as workarounds for things that currently don't, in preparation for when they fix them. Right? Right. With all that sorted, emergency exits are here, here, and here, and we hope you enjoy your flight on Wonder Kid Airways. Unfortunately, with the arrival of FM26, some of its bags appear to have got lost along the way, and I wanted to put this stuff up front so you don't get disappointed by it later. Importing and exporting and even saving of scouting filters is currently not a thing in the game, which makes certain tasks extremely difficult. Not to mention some of the filters that are there don't actually work properly. It's a little bit like being on the motorway at 70 miles an hour, trying to change the radio station and watching in horror as the boot opens wide. It's not all bad news though, as I believe there is hope for us yet, as ported saves from FM24, when put into FM26, do actually carry the filters over successfully, including their names as well, and they actually work even when it's supposed to be broken. Very, very weird, but we'll talk more about that a little bit later. What's even weirder is the same filters that are broken actually work when you port them over, but not if you remove them and add them back again. Something weird is going on. Call Mulder and Scully, because I need to update my references. Also, leaving these shores on a boat down the river Styx is Director of Football suggestions. You can no longer ask your doff for a free agent striker and have him insist that there aren't any in the world. This year, he's locked his office for good, and you two are no longer on speaking terms. The last giant absentee is the inability to select multiple players on screen, such as released players or youth intakes, as you'll see here. So you absolute monsters out there that were scouting all of these and had your scouts clocking up 300,000 air miles every single year will have to find a new victim. Might I suggest some ants with a magnifying glass? Worry not though, I have a workaround for you too. But that's the bad news out of the way, let's move on to the good. this year, I've decided to break this guide down into game stages and slot in the scouting methods when I believe they become most effective, or at least the earliest time you could use them. Perhaps, we'll see. And when I say early seasons, I really just kind of mean season 1 and maybe a little bit of season 2. And a quick note is that as far as I can tell, all of these methods do work on the women's side of the game. The only real difference should be the player values and the transfer and wage demands. So let's crack on with agent offers. At the very start of a save, you will be absolutely bombarded with these because, well, there's a lot of free agents available at the beginning of a save. Over a few months, they'll slowly start to dry up as they either retire or find themselves clubs, but worry not, there will be boons of these throughout the save, usually around the same sort of time that there is a contract release date, so mostly June 30th and I think, well, December 31st. It's essentially an unemployment line for mediocre fullbacks, but one man's contract termination is another man's star player. And this gets more and more useful the further down the footballing pyramid you're playing. Not quite so handy for you budding Real Madrid managers out there, but we'll come to you in a bit. So I'm actually in the start of season 2 here just to prove that it can be done further along, and the way that you can isolate these players to solely see agent offers is by going into here and, well, would you believe it, clicking agent offers or free agent offers. You've got a bit of both. Really for these you want the free agent offers because these guys probably have clubs. It's actually interesting to note that not all of the players under agent offers and free agent offers have clubs. So why are they different? Regardless, use both of them, select a big group of them, offer them a trial like this. Transfer, offer trial. You have to do 4 weeks now. You used to be able to get the full information after 3, but this year it does seem to be 4. Once a lot of them join you, your squad's gonna look like this. Obviously, you can't sign most of these lads, but you do still have the fog of war. And there is a cheeky little way that you can peek behind the curtain and get a little look at this, which is to essentially put one of those players in your starting 11. Now, you still can't see their attributes here, but if you put them in the team, click on the role, you will then suddenly see their key attributes for the different roles uncovered, because at the moment this completely undresses the UI and just shows you everything. Expect that to be patched though. The crucial part here though is because these players are on trial with you, it's you and your coaches that are assessing them, and your scouts are not wasting their time trawling around England looking for them, so they can focus on more important tasks like finding the key to your director of football's office. Make sure when you get that first trial through, you delegate finalization to your assistant, as it means that he'll just accept them all for you and it stops you having to do constant clicking. But you might want to turn that off later in the window just in case he finalizes a transfer too soon. Out of interest, the way to find that is into club, responsibilities, transfers and contracts, and then this one right here. You want to make sure you take back control of that at some point. But this should absolutely allow you to find a couple of guys that are guaranteed to make you better. Whack in a couple of international wage rise clauses should they get a cap for England. Spoiler alert, they're not going to, and you should be able to get them on a really nice contract as well. There are 2 mighty fine ways to get loans when you first start out, and one of them is the Senior Affiliate Club. Now, most likely you won't be able to get one when you first join a team because they'll just say, hey, you've not been here long enough, what you on about? Makes sense. But to inquire about such things, there's 2 ways to go there. We can either go via the Club Vision page, where we can do it in the top right here to make a board request and select Senior Affiliate, or you can do it through the board directly by literally hitting board, and it should be in the left-hand side here as well. Either way, they're going to say no to me, but that's because I've only just joined the club. After a couple of months, they'll most likely say yes. So this is perhaps more of a late stage season 1 strategy heading into the next year, really, and not likely to get one straight away. But once you do get one over the line, it can be an absolute goldmine, as you'll have access to free loans available from a much, much better team than you. It's a bit like borrowing your older siblings' clothes, except Crystal Palace might get a little bit more upset if you return their left wing back covered in mud. The second and somewhat easier option is to simply look up players in the database who would be willing to join your merry band of men or women for a short spell this season. I simply whacked in an age filter here, set it to doubtful for loan interest just to catch as many as we can do, and I'd have a little look through some of these, my friends. Some of them we have scouting knowledge of, but another thing you can do is potentially add a transfer value column and just see what the highest value players you can get, as that's usually a sign. However, when it comes to loans, AI clubs tend to be quite zealous still with the demands they make upon you, the loanee. Particularly when you're out of the very lower leagues, I find that they will demand your firstborn as well as their entire wages and a sizable monthly fee to allow you to take their player on loan. But then if you ask them on, say, the last day of the window, usually it'll be like, hey, 20% of the wages and we'll pay you a visit. The moral of the story, wait till the end of the window, then go absolutely mad. And I guess the argument to be made here is that by the time the end of the window comes around, they're willing to do anything to get their 17-year-old prospect out on loan and get him some playing time, so they'd frankly accept a bag of crisps if you gave it to them. Right then, Xabi Alonso cosplayers, I haven't forgotten you, let's move. So role scouting. I actually did a full video about this a couple of weeks ago, so I'll leave a link to that in the description as well so you can get a more in-depth view of what that actually means. But essentially, you're just scouting specifically by the role you're looking for. And luckily, I made views for every single role in the game that you can use. So in this case, if I'm looking for a poacher, I'd simply filter this list by strikers, set a few filters to account for craziness, oddities, and if you're Fulham accidentally signing Willian for a 3rd time, then I just choose an attribute that I want to have for that role, in this case, finishing. I sort the entire list by that and look at lovely color clumps that suggest that there's a good player lying under there. Now, for the purposes of examples in this video, I actually have attribute masking turned off for this, which means you'll obviously have way more vagaries when you do this. But with a custom role view for every single role in the game, you should be able to find players that you could at least start scouting to give you an idea, and it's definitely a good method. But again, more of that in the other video. And if you are an attribute masking off enjoyer like we discussed earlier, this should be absolutely perfect for you because you can see all the attributes straight up. It will be very, very easy now for you to triage a couple of these, find the perfect player, and win the window basically every time, especially if you did filter it down further by adding a couple of attribute filters on top of that. So set that up, bish bash bosh, job's a good one, and you can pretty much find the perfect player every time doing that. And the reason this is good both with and without attribute masking on is that if you're looking for a very specific role, potentially for a first team player rather than just youngsters for the future, I would say this is one of your best ways to go about getting them because it works at every level of scouting. You just have to adjust your expectations from when you're Real Madrid or Real Madriz. Now you're probably thinking, surely recruitment focuses and the new transfer room in options can be done nice and upfront in these types of saves. And you'd be correct. I just think they work even better after a season or two, and trying to formulate all these abstract concepts into one followable chronology is actually kind of difficult. And it's my video. Now by mid-save, I really do just mean about Season 3 onwards, although I do find between Seasons 3 and 6 especially, some of these methods really do cook harder than usual. And we're going to kick off with the absolute poster child for that, Belgian amateur scouting. Don't worry about the name, it's basically Theseus's ship of scouting, and the name is just a holdover from when we stumbled onto it. But because I'm a sucker for themes, I'm going to demonstrate it with Belgium anyway. For context, the save file that you're seeing in a lot of these tests, and will continue to see, is from 4 years into the future, so essentially at the beginning of Season 5. That way the game world is settled in, regions have had a chance to populate, and things are nicely ready. The team I'm in charge of, Rakov, actually are current Polish champions as well, 15 points clear, so they're a relatively good side. I just wanted you to have that context, that way you can understand where the players fit into that when you see their star ratings. They even have a 29-year-old Reece Nelson, so this method works extremely well when you're in one of the smaller nations of Europe potentially, and the best part is the players are always free. So how do we find them? Well, we're going to want to filter it and edit the search, of course, and obviously you want between 15 and 18 because that's where these players are likely to be. You then want amateur contract status. As far as I know, there isn't a way to do amateur and non-contract at the same time, or if there is, I haven't found it, but you are really looking for both. And then of course we're going to start with Belgium because that's where we found this originally. But you'll see if I do switch amateur to non-contract in Belgium, it finds a lot less results. Still worth scouting though. We're going to want this view because of a very specific reason, and that is this column here, along with all the others too. They're definitely helpful. Now, depending on your level, it probably would just behoove you to scout all of these guys. It's only 38 of them. It's not that many. And even when you add in other countries, which we're going to do in a minute, it still isn't going to be that many. But say you've got like 500 of them, you might want to break it down a little bit. And the best way to go about doing that, I would say, is by looking at guys who've played loads of games, because there's clearly a reason for it for the most part, especially if they're younger than 18 as well, because that would be an even bigger indicator. So I would just go through, select a load of these guys, get a 1-week scout report on the guys, and then check back in a minute. And I'm just going to go through and do this exact same thing for Norway and Denmark as well, just to give us a bit of a base to start with. But there's so many more nations you can do this in. Croatia is great. Colombia is fantastic for doing this in South America, and there are loads of them. Just to give you an idea, 424 in Colombia, which at that point you very much are going to need to focus on that. I mean, this guy's got 48 goals, but really target any country that historically produces good players. Not all of them will have anyone in there, as their contracts may not work like that, but you can usually find a few. So now that we've given them a chance to be scouted a little bit, there's still some more to come through, but this is how I've set it up. So I've just added in some things for some other nations for the purposes of this so you can see it. You'll obviously get them in your scout reports too. I just wanted to isolate them to one screen if I could. So I'm just looking for guys in Belgium, Norway, or Denmark, currently on amateur. There are obviously a few that are on non-contract as well. And it's produced some relatively solid players. Now, if you were a little bit further down, the sort of level where Rakov might have started, you'd probably find more of these guys would be around about the 5-star potential level, but that doesn't mean they're bad. As this guy, honestly, for a goalkeeper at 6'4" at 18, actually looks pretty good when you look at some of his goalkeeping technical attributes. They're astonishing. And also this dude who has 32 goals in 59 appearances for his club. I mean, wow, okay, he's actually way better. His tent poles for finishing first touch, heading, he's just a very solid player. May not have the potential, but unless you scout them further, you simply won't know. And it's just a great way of finding some potentially free talent that you can take a complete free hit on, because it doesn't cost you anything other than their wage, obviously, which would likely be very low. I find this is especially useful between seasons 3 and 6. If you start it too soon, there won't be any regens ready to be in these squads just yet. And often I find if you go past season 6, usually the players there will have outlived their usefulness to you because your squad will have developed past them. Now, occasionally you can still find an absolute worldie, as I have done in the past 2 game cycles, but you'll probably only find one guy that's going to be with you in like 10 years time. And this was only looking at 3 countries. If you've got more scouts and more options, just go nuts with it if you can. So what are the nations that don't have players eligible for this? Brazilian Freebies. And this one has been a constant source of solid mid-level players for those early-ish seasons of a save, and especially even later on if you're doing a Building a Nation save and just want some players that you can bring in to ship out to other teams in your league that might actually be kind of good. Now, obviously, you'll need worldwide scouting for this because it's Brazil, unless you're in Brazil. So all you're looking for here is a couple of simple things. Again, the age is the same, currently playing in Brazil, and their transfer value is at most, well, 0. And you can see that that's found us 291 players, a lot of which have played quite a lot of football in their early ages. So once again, because you're not going to be able to see most of their attributes, you're going to have to rely on things like the amount of games they've played, how many goals they've scored, any youth appearances, which is unlikely, but you never know, as well as the club they play for as well, potentially. But generally speaking, just take a nice chunk of those guys and get a scout report on them as well. There's also one other thing you can do, which is where you set the value to between £1 and 10k, which will maybe isolate a few guys who have crazy low release clauses and stuff, but not technically free. Now, most of the clubs in here are not massive, but you do occasionally find the odd random dude from Botafogo or Flamengo who just has a release clause of like £5,000 to foreign clubs. So it's worth keeping an eye on it just in case you can pick up a worldy bargain. And you can see here that after a little bit of scouting on some of them might actually have a little bit about them that is probably worth a closer look, especially as a lot of them actually seem to be 17. So the better ones seem to be some of the younger players that are still playing, which is kind of what we expected. And you can do this in other leagues outside of just Brazil. I just find it works best here because they have an insanely good youth rating. So statistically, you're going to get some absolute bangers. And with a much larger sample size than I've got here, you're bound to have a couple of 5-star guys in there too. Although honestly, even if you don't, they can still be very usable at the lower levels. Right then, let's mix it up a bit with some even weirder things you can do while staying on this player database search screen. International cap scouting, or natty caps for short, is a fun little way of finding some interesting players. It's a little bit like roulette, where you either win a solid player for your loan farm that might have a little bit of potential, or first dibs on the next Norwegian phenomenon. In fact, now that I think about it, it's absolutely nothing like roulette because you get to keep your house. And the way it works is simple. Get into your scouting fields, of course, go up into here, hit international, add international caps, obviously between 15 and 18, add is at least 1, and the screen will do nothing. And you'll be like, oh, so what you want to do is take this, switch it to 10, and then switch it back to 1 again, because reasons, and then it works. And all this will be is a giant list of players who are between the ages of 15 and 18 and have made at least 1 international appearance for their nation. Some of them, like this lad here, will have made a lot. 19 by the age of 18 is wild. Your best bet in terms of sorting them initially with the amount that we've got here is to probably use the INF sort and look for anyone with a wanted symbol on them, because there's clearly a reason why, especially if you're playing a save with a lot of playable leagues, as this will be an even bigger indicator, because just let them do the scouting for you. Now, annoyingly, in its current state, 26 won't let you add a column to this screen that shows their nationalities, which is very frustrating. And even on the views that do show nationality, the sort doesn't work properly. So yeah, hopefully that's rectified soon, because it would be very nice to be able to have that on this screen, because then you could sort by their nationalities, and that's a really good way of triaging it too, because a guy called up for reunion at 17 is not likely to be anything special, but that guy that's called up for Denmark, holy hell, Batman. So for now, your best bet is just using the clubs that the players play for to work that out, as well as also hovering here, which will show you their nationality on here. But just going through this should give you a nice batch of players that you could potentially scout, or you could just do all of them if you've got enough scouts, because why the hell not? You can also do the same thing with youth international appearances, but you'll note when I switch this on and off again the way that we have to, you end up with quite a lot more players, around 10 times as many. At that point, you're going to solely want to go after anybody with a WNT symbol on them, because otherwise, how else are you supposed to triage this? Though appearances could definitely help you here, but there's a lot of players to sort through. Or when some of those players are scouted, you'll end up with something like this. Now, this is just the scouted ones from that, which is why I've ticked it, but you'll see this one has been chefing. There are 4 players on here that are 4.5-star PA or above, including 2 genuinely monstrous guys. Now, one's at Stade Liège, which will be tough for you to sign, but this dude here, Ramon Correas, who's been playing for Alianza in El Salvador, 17 caps. I mean, if this isn't a proof of concept, I don't know what is. My goodness me. He's the definition of what you want when you find this is exactly what you want to see, basically. Who's he wanted by out of interest? Yeah, I mean, Man City and Juve, there you go. But my guess is he got caps when he was 16 or 17, so you could have found him earlier. And this fella here is Ben Aniz. He's no slouch either, playing for Vizela. I do this every 2 years in most of my saves. That way it gives a chance for new players to come through and the old guys to sort of age out of being in those brackets on the filters. But we now come to a more complex type of filtering, and one that will be a lot easier once we can actually import and export filters. 20 is plenty scouting. The remit here is very simple. Find players that your scouts believe have potentially got a 20 in one of their attributes, and then target them for a closer look. Now, I'm using my Viswa save for this example because I have attribute masking switched on, and with it switched off, you don't really need to worry about this. The pain point comes from the fact that you have to turn on every single one of these attributes and set it to 20, and then it will look a little bit something like this. But then crucially, you want it to either match 4 or 5. believe. It used to be 5, but it seems like 4 is a better option this year. If you can import all that stuff, it'd be absolutely fine, but recreating that every single time is a pain in the arse, which is why this is one that's like, ugh, do I want to bother with it? But the good thing about this is you could do this in most windows, and because of the transitional nature of scouting knowledge, you'll basically get a different set of players each time. But once this is easy to import and export, just running one of these a couple of times a window at various points and then just scouting any players that come up on the list is a good way of finding someone a little bit crazy. Right then, before we move on to some of the inbuilt tools that are actually in the game, don't worry, I haven't forgot about them, it's time for some workarounds for those of you that absolutely love a select all, scout all approach to things. Youth intake scouting. In previous FMs, you could literally just go into the world screen, into transfers, into youth intakes, and you could isolate by league, or you could just scout loads of them. Select all, get scout report. However, in 26, you simply cannot do this anymore. You can still find that menu by going into world, then into continents, then into world, which has always been my favorite continent. From within that, you can go to transfers, and then you can isolate youth intakes like so, scroll back to them, and there they are. But importantly, you can't select multiple players on here, which sort of means that this screen loses its purpose if that's what you were going to do. I remember back in the FM18 kind of era, I used to do this as well. Have my scouts scouting 5,000 players a season, but to find anyone good, it was a little bit like looking for a needle in a giant stack of almost identical needles, if you catch my drift. So it wasn't really worth it for me, but if you are committed to this life of masochism, worry not, there is a workaround. Back to the database screen. So what we're looking for here is players between the ages of 15 and 16 specifically. The Everyone Club is based in where you can do division or nation potentially. I'm just going to use England as an example for this. And in theory, oh, hello. It should isolate them all, but obviously this is set for interest. So if I put this as not considered, because obviously they're too young to be looking at a club like me, but if you're further into a save and you're not looking at, say, the Premier League, you'll find plenty of players that probably are interested. And in theory, for the most part, this should isolate every player from the most recent intake of that league. Now, it's not entirely foolproof because you could get a guy who was really young in last year's intake that still technically qualifies for these age brackets, but that's as close as I think you're going to get. Now, obviously, these guys aren't actually going to have played for their clubs. Well, actually, I say that. Wait a minute. That's not entirely true, is it? Wow. I was just going to say you could just scout away on these guys, but there's two fellas here. I mean, he plays for Barrow, which is one thing. This guy plays for Arsenal. He's 16. Ercan Kilic has played 2 games for Arsenal in the Premier League at oh my god, he's good, isn't he? I mean, if you wanted proof of concept, I guess, there it is. Just maybe hope that next time you find a guy that isn't at Arsenal and you can realistically sign him. But get your scout reports on those guys and crack on. But you could do that for any country, or you could isolate it to certain leagues if you wanted to. Either way, job's a good one. So now to the last of the methods that heavily rely on the player database screen. Now, this one is usually twofold, but it seems there have been some changes in 26, shocker, that have somewhat simplified this. And by that, I mean they've removed something. Firstly, there used to be an email that you'd receive towards the end of a season that would basically just contain a big list of all the younger players being released by larger teams in your nation. I thought that had gone last year, but it turns out it hadn't, but it certainly has this year. The only thing you do get is this email on the 2nd of July, which is days after those contracts have expired, that tells you that clubs have released players, but it doesn't tell you who, really, and those that it does talk about are all high-profile names and not youngsters, and nothing you can click on from this really does a lot for you. But I wouldn't worry about it because there's a better way of doing it anyway, so let's talk about that. Back in the before times, you could simply go into a league, look on transfers, and then look at the list of released players. And then you could simply trial a load of those guys who'd had their contracts expire. It was a great way of finding players when I was knocking about in the 3rd tier of Belgium. However, much like the youth intake screens, you can still access these, but you can't select multiple players, and thus they sort of lose their purpose in that sense, in that we can't exploit them. If the league isn't even set to playable, you can't even do it as easily as that. You'd have to actually go into the nation itself up on here, say England for example, though frankly you might be better typing it in, then go into transfers, then go into release players from there, and that's where you'll find them. But they're not showing up here yet because I'm not actually ticked over to them being released yet. But the crucial thing is all of this is still available, once again, on the player database screen, and timing here is very important. Assuming we're looking at summer releases, we really want to be doing it a couple of days before those contracts expire, so I've chosen the 28th of June as I feel like that's about right. That's with the contracts ending on the 30th. The only other date where this may matter is the contracts that end at the end of the calendar year, so in some South American leagues and Ireland. A couple of days earlier probably won't matter, but you don't want to go past and into July. So the way I've set this filter up is as follows. We're looking at players whose contract is expiring in 1 month, which should get us all of these guys. You can put an age filter on it if you want, but I just leave that blank honestly for the funsies. Then just add a condition which their club and the division are these, or whichever ones you want to look for basically. I just chose this smattering as an example here to have them all in. So we've got and then or. Then obviously we need to filter this by players who are actually interested in joining us. So we'll set this to transfer transfer only and then doubtful. Then you can either sort it by oldest players, just in case there's any crazy guys in there like Kenny Tete of Fulham. Love to see it. But it's worth doing just in case you do find an absolute monster that's wanting to leave their big club but winding their career down without retiring. It's how I got Alan Judge to come to Luxembourg. But realistically, you want to flip it the other way and you'll be looking at mostly 20-year-olds or above, because that way they've had their first full professional contract, but now they are leaving those clubs. And these are the guys we really want. So at that point, I would quite literally go through and offer a trial, crucially, to any player who's 23 years old or under, basically. And even though they have clubs, they will, for the most part, accept the trials, unless the player turns it down, but the clubs will almost always accept. And this is important. If I was even one season further back, this would be even more useful, but right now it's still probably pretty cool to have. Now, when you do offer these players trials, very importantly, do not approach their agent, do not offer them a contract or anything yet. It's very important that you let their existing contract with their sort of parent club or old club, if you like, expire first. But you want to be trialing them while they are still at those clubs. So essentially, take them on trial on the 28th, wait until like the 1st of July when they are technically out of contract but still on trial with you, and that's the moment when you can start asking their agents of things. But if that's the case, why not just trial them after their contracts expire? Because the second those contracts are up, teams will be circling like vultures and you will miss out on most of your priority targets, and those that you do manage to get will not be the guys you're looking for. Trialing them a couple of days early while they still have those contracts just seems to put some of the other teams off a little bit. Not always, but it definitely helps you. Sort of ring fences those players away from everybody else. My players. But that isn't the main reason why you want to do this. The main reason you want to do this is because of the financial benefit. So I'm going to put some examples on the screen to show you just how powerful this can be. There's a before, which will be while they're on trial with us, but they are still under contract, and then after, which is a couple of days later when they're still on trial, the same trial, but are now out of contract. We have Mr. O'Neill here that was looking for 2.7 to 3.6k per week while he was under contract, and then the moment that was up, it was 1.2 to 1.5k a week. That's like a 50% drop. Even more dramatic was the drop for Andre Harriman-Anous at Arsenal here. He wanted 3.1 to 4k before being released by Arsenal, but the second that had gone through, 775 to 950 pounds. That's literally 77% savings. Sorry, I feel like I've suddenly become a shopping channel. And lastly, Aidan Harris of Newcastle, prior to leaving, 3.1 to 3.7, and then after he's officially left them, 2.2 to 2.6. The point is, that's the way to do it, I would say, because you can still negotiate them down further after that as well. That's just the starting point. Another fun day you can do this is the 29th of December, because that is the first date that you can approach to sign any player whose contract finishes on the 30th of June. So if you go into your scouting filters and set up one for expiring in 6 months, this will show you all of those guys. And you can see there's a lot. And some of them are people like Serge Gnabry. Now, of course, since these guys are still under contract, it will obviously cost you a lot more, but it does give you a chance at first dibs on some genuinely monstrous talent occasionally. But if you're managing in England, this is off the cards as you're actually not allowed to do this. But if you're outside of England, not only can you do this, you can also do this to players from England. With the way they mess me about in building a nation, do you know what? It's nice to see them get a bit of comeuppance. And sometimes you could even pay a small fee in January to get them early. May not always be worth it though. And beware of players with optional extensions, because sometimes the clubs will just trigger those straight away and they'll leave them to the last minute. That being said, it's always worth a bid because sometimes they just don't. Right then, before we swing towards the infamous team report scouting and some Spanish lower league shenanigans, it's time to talk about the tools that the game actually provides for you to use, and that is Recruitment Focuses and, of course, the new Transfer Room In system. Recruitment Focuses, since they were introduced into FM, have always been a bit of a bugbear of mine because I've never felt they were good enough and produced enough results to be a primary form of scouting. That was always better things to do. I tended to just leave them on in the background, which I guess is kind of the purpose. They're a little bit like the FM scouting equivalent of lo-fi tavern music. But as a side note, if you do find that your scout keeps making Recruitment Focuses, even when you've told him not to, make sure that you are in charge of both assigning scouts and handling scouting meetings. Otherwise, bro will just keep taking out credit cards in your name. It's also very annoying that the game defaults to all focuses rather than just the ones that are currently in progress. Right now it doesn't matter, but believe me it will. But from what I can tell, the underlying mechanics of Recruitment Focuses have remained largely the same between game versions, meaning that I still recommend the exact same thing as I did before, and that is Iron Owl's method. I'll link to his full deep dive video about this in the description, but bear in mind that's for 24. It should still work the same, but you never know with these things. Maybe I can convince him to make a 26 version. But the short and condensed version is as follows. You basically want to set up Recruitment Focuses with these 3 categories, or 4 really. Leaving this part completely blank because you want to keep it vague. You then want to have minimum current ability set to 5 grey stars, or just basically any grey stars. Then set the age to between 15 and 18, keep it on standard, and make sure that the include results thing is unticked, and leave everything else blank. Don't worry about assigning scouts, that's automatically happened. Then you want to just do the exact same thing, but for more specific ages. This one is the same thing, but obviously it's for between 17 and 18. The 17 one is 16 to 17, and the 16 one is 15 to 16, and so on. Then you just wait a little bit, players will start coming through, come and have a look, ignore the match ones and only look at the in-progress ones. The players you're really after are the ones that show up in here. Obviously more players would have appeared on here before, but this has been had a little chance to progress through because this is from my Vispa save. And just to show you an example of some of the crazy stuff that can happen, look at this. In progress, look at this guy here. He's 16 years old and he's 4-star CA in Poland. Finding him nearly gave us a goddamn heart attack, especially as he's only just turned 16 as well. His birthday was literally yesterday in game. He's a bit of an outlandish example, I must admit, but still, what a player. And the best part is because your scouts are the ones doing this, they only find you players that are actually within your scouting range, so you know that you can scout all of them. When I started writing this video, this screen was completely balked and it was actually unusable because the ability and potential columns just said unknown, no matter how much scouting knowledge you had on them, and thus you couldn't use them. But luckily, that has now been fixed in the most recent patch last week, and it is now, well, it's a revelation. You'll need to restart them from time to time to get fresh batches of players through. You can set them to ongoing, but I find that that doesn't seem to do very much for some reason. And you can start this really whenever in a save. I did this first season with Vispa, but I find starting it later on just gives you that extra loveliness when you find all those crazy cool regens coming through. I don't know how this guy even ended up appearing. I'm assuming it's from add players to playable teams. And this carries us nicely into the last of the game's inbuilt tools and the brand new one for this year, Transfer Room In. And this is very, very interesting indeed. So with the arrival of FM26, it brought with it the expanded transfer room where you could not only do what you did in the past, where you could offer players out and find clubs for them, you could now also post players to meet other people's requirements there, but more importantly, you could use it to buy players. So you could now just make a set of requirements like this and say, hey, I want a player that meets those requirements, and then other teams could bring you their players. It's the dream. Make other teams do your scouting for you. Now, due to time constraints of me actually wanting to get this video out sooner rather than later with all this stuff in, I haven't maybe had a chance to go in as deep into this as I would like to, but I still found some quite interesting things to begin with. So if you do want a video where I go much, much deeper into all of the different variables of this and try to figure out some truly optimized settings, then let me know and I'd happily take a closer look at this. It's the exact type of deep dives and lock-ins I really need in my life, because I do think there's a lot more that could be explored if we just find the right combinations of variables, much like a lot of the other areas of the game. And because it's new, it's mostly uncharted territory. A test I have done though is to see how effective it is for finding you loan players, because that's often something you'll want to do in the early season to get some good players from other teams. So what I've done is I've set up individual requirements for every sort of position in the team. Obviously there's 10 because we have 2 centre backs, right? Between the ages of 15 and 25, only looking at loans with no playing time, no anything else like that, just simple stuff. And you can see that a few days later, we do actually have some responses to those exact things. In fact, 21 of them across the 10 different positions. Only one of the players seems to actually come highly recommended. That is Jens Hjertedal here of, I believe, Juventus. Now, what I will say is the loan one doesn't seem to give you a great deal of super high quality players without a few exceptions, and you will have to pay for it too. And the other thing is you'll note that it didn't find any fullbacks on either side, and it's the same with wingbacks too, because I tested this on my other save. For some reason, lone wingbacks and fullbacks just don't exist between these ages from what I can work out, and I don't really know why. And considering all those different quite open requirements, we still only got 21 responses with 10 requirements, the majority of which were 1 or 2 players, with the occasional ones having 5 or even 4 players, which was weird for the left-sided wing there. So I wanted to see if it would work better when you're looking for transfers instead of loans, because honestly with these kind of results and the players' relative quality to my squad, I think you're better off just using the other loan methods for this, especially as this is earlier in the window. Maybe it's different towards the end when there's more clubs available, but I don't know. So as an alternative, I decided to mix things up and go for purely transfers. The exact same requirements, ages, positions, in and out of possession, just keeping those the same, but the only difference being we're now looking for specifically transfers. You can actually set one up for transfer and loan, but I don't know if that's actually going to give you any more players or whether it just removes some. I'm not sure. This is all test for another day, but I wanted to see how many responses we would get for this and the sort of level of players. And as you can see, it was a lot better. 151 responses off of those 10, with at least 10 players, if not well over in fact, for every single selection. And some of them actually look pretty damn good. Now, unfortunately, you can't add columns to this. You can change the views, but there isn't really one view that you can use that actually contains all the information you'd want. Like, we can see their ability and potential here, but we can't see their age or clubs, and vice versa a lot of the time. Point being, though, it does seem to produce some very, very interesting players in here, potentially. I mean, this guy here, Marin Juric of FK Sarajevo, I mean, he is a very, very good striker, who I suspect would be available very, very cheap indeed. I mean, who's he wanted by? What a motley crew that is. Juve and then a couple of Polish lads like us. But that's a very good sign that this might actually be a usable technique going forward. Now, a couple of notes on setting these up, because this screen is very, very buggy indeed. It's quite quick to create requirements. You just literally click there, and then you're done with 1 and 1. And then you can just select the ages like I did with 25. However, when you're going to create another requirement, please pay attention to this, because say I'm going to create like a midfield one now, you'll note that despite the fact that the in possession one is the one that's highlighted, it's actually the out of possession thing I'm choosing. So you actually have to click this again and then select it. So just pay attention, because it might catch you out. The game is also really weird about sorting by age on certain views, even though the age metric is there. You'll note that I can't actually sort by it for some reason. But if you go into Scout Transfer, that one does actually work, and you can find some youngsters potentially. But for the most part, part, a lot of these guys are sort of 20 plus. So in truth, it does feel like a great way of finding some players, but with a few little customization options and a few little cleanups to just the UI and stuff, this could actually be really, really good indeed. It also seems to use the nation's transfer preferences as well with regards to who you're seeing. So if you notice when you are using this that a lot of players you're being suggested are players from the same leagues and countries, that's likely the reason for it. Poland is a lot more blank because of the database I'm using here, which is why we're getting players from a little bit more eclectic places. Like this chap here is from Nigeria. Love to see it. In addition, the responses seem to come through within the first 3 days, and then no matter how long you leave it after that, you're not getting any new responses. Basically, you're going to have to cancel them all and restart them later to get anything new. It's like fishing, but all the fish are ridiculously impatient. And if a player is brought to you like that and your scouts really like them, you'll get an email straight away. Pretty much the second you see a couple of these, just head over and that should be the amount that you're going to get. Maybe one more day's worth, but that's about it. It has got me wondering though, and I really shouldn't be doing this in real time, but there you go. I get curious about these things. If I was to set this so that they had a smaller age range, would it bring me the exact same players from within that range, or would it add some new players into it because I've got more specific rules? So ideally, if I was to say, I don't know, 15 to 19 instead of 15 to 25, would I get these 4 dudes and that's it, or would it throw some more in at me? That's the question I kind of want to know the answer to. The sort of thing I probably should have tested before I started recording this video, but you know, let's figure it out together, shall we? So I've gone back to the original start point, I've set up some new requirements, the exact same roles as before, or positions, but this time it's 15 to 19. I'm just going to sim it like, I don't know, 10 days, 2 weeks or so. We'll know immediately if it's the same guys because it will literally say responses 4 or something, right? Okay, I've simmed a couple of weeks into the future just to make sure that we got all these reports through. Let's have a little gander at where are they now? In transfer room in, it should be 30. 30 is very interesting because that implies to me that the more specific you are with certain things, the better chances you've got of actually finding what you're looking for. Because it stands to reason that any of the players that we're going to see here, because there's clearly new guys in here, would have also fit those previous requirements, but for some reason they weren't put forward when in fact they should have been, which is very intriguing. It even found some fullbacks. Okay, so let's see what we got. Are they the same guys as before? At least the same guys as before from the top of this level anyway. Let's have a look at the potentials potentially. So I recognize... so Juric was the guy from before. He was definitely in it. And Ronald Villalta, I think he was in it as well. I recognize the name. Good God, he's really good. I think he was in the previous one. But there's a couple of extra dudes that I'm not sure were potentially in there. They've actually both been recommended too. Ahmed Ali of Fountain Gate, Tanzania. That's cool. That's very cool. Just a random Tanzanian club called Fountain Gate trying to get me to sign one of their players. He's very good indeed. Who's he wanted by? PSG, of course. What about Stephen Collins? He's probably... Oh, he's Canadian. That's kind of cool. He'd probably have quite high wage demands as well. And in fact, he's worth a lot of money. And the last one, we've got Jacob Bihu, which is kind of a cool name. He's from Vanuatu. Legitimately, if this wasn't recorded, I wouldn't believe myself here. He's 6'3" and has 16... Sorry, he's from Vanuatu. 9 caps. I don't think I've ever seen a player from Vanuatu with, like, any actual ability. No offense, Vanuatuan viewers. He's free, isn't he? Look, he's worth nothing. He's on £25 a week. And he's actually playing for a Vanuatuan club as well, Tapuji Imere, right? They're not, yeah. The only time I've ever seen Vanuatuan players in the past is when they've come through either an Aussie club or a Kiwi club and using their youth rating. This guy's not. I'm very glad I did this extra test now because it does look like there's some genuine talent in here and you get more players by filtering it down a little bit. Either way, the fact that there's a Tanzanian and a Vanuatuan in here is brilliant. Trying to get this back on track a little bit. I guess the logic here is that you're not going to get massive clubs shelling their players towards you here because why would they be doing that? You're going to get smaller sides that are kind of happy to earn a bit of money, potentially, out of you, and the player kind of maybe wants to move up in the world. So as long as you've got some kind of status, you could probably get some clubs just be like, hey, please take our guy. We'd love a 50% an sale fee clause, which they're not going to get. So how many players did it find under 18 out of interest? 20? None. Everyone in here, in fact, some of them are now 20, which I'm assuming is because they've turned 20 since this has happened. And I'm guessing the reason for that is that most players under 18 are not allowed to move anyway, so they wouldn't be able to sign them in the first place. Or you don't have the reputation to the point where they'd be willing to up sticks and leave their country to join you at 16. Maybe if I was a bigger side, we'd get more offers of slightly younger players. But either way, looks like you can find some pretty goated 18 and 19-year-olds from crazy places doing this. Either way, it seems like a great way of casting a very wide net over a lot of things to potentially get you some bites over the course of a window if you were to do this a couple of times. And honestly, I know it might look like a lot of requirements to set up, but I think I did those 10 each time in like just over a minute. So it really doesn't take that long if you don't put too many specifics things in there. Who knows? You may even get even more options if you take away like one of their in or out possession roles and just leave the in possession potentially. But honestly, probably just put the positions from your formation in there since that's what you're signing them for. It seems like potentially there's a lot more to uncover here that would need a little bit more deep testing. So if you do want to see that as a separate video, let me know so we can move on to the next thing. Because now we move to latter stage scouting, and really by that I just kind of mean 6 and 7 seasons like that onwards. It's not really that latter stage, but for some of you it might actually be if you do shorter term saves more often. By this point you've set yourself up, you've had a few years at your club, regens are populating through the database, and you're kind of settled now and know what you're doing. Your team may now be towards the top of one of the nations that you're playing in, or if you started really low down, are still working your way up through the leagues, or you might have stayed at the top because you're still managing Real Madrid. The point is, it's around about now that I really do like starting to truly scour for the talent. And a cheeky way you can do that is with the Spanish lower leagues. Now this isn't actually unique to Spain in any way, just any nation that's got a large youth rating and a lower division that likely splits into many different leagues within that. So Spain is very good for this, and Serie D, don't even get me started on Serie D. The later in a save you do this, the better really, because you're hoping by now that a lot of the players that were assigned to that club at the beginning of a save, while the league wasn't switched on, are now essentially either left the club, retired, or just non-existent anymore, which means they won't have any players in their squads. Now my test here was done in season 5 of the save, so perhaps a little too soon to get the most out of this, but I think the data is still going to be quite useful to you. I think honestly from season 8 to 9 onwards it could be ridiculously powerful, but the way that you do it is you obviously want to make sure that you've got those leagues switched on. So go in here, go to add a league, obviously in this case Spain, well they're going to go to men's, and then we've got to go down to the 4th tier. And we want to make sure they're all playable. And obviously this is going to make a huge impact on your processing, potentially, although the game is definitely better at that this year. But it's a sacrifice you're willing to make when you see what I'm about to show you. Because the Spanish 4th tier contains 90 teams split across 5 different divisions, each having 18 teams in. And that's a lot of players that the game is likely going to have to fill up if you have add players to playable teams set up. Although it may do it anyway, because I think that only really applies to the start of a save. And when adding all these players, because Spain has such a high youth rating, there's just an ever so slightly large chance that they're going to produce some absolute monsters down here. To give you an idea, before I switch these leagues on, there's 114 players between the ages of 15 and 18 occupying in these divisions. Afterwards, there is ever so slightly more, 1,586 to be precise, and that's a lot to look through, I grant you, so obviously you need to find a way to triage them. One of the first and favourite ways for me to do this, of course, is with the wanted symbol. That will certainly give you some useful information straight off. Now, of course, you'll note that there are some B teams down here as well. Those are the kind of players you'll probably want to ignore because they might be good, but they'll also be under contract with much larger clubs, usually in La Liga, so you don't really want those guys. So a couple of things to pay attention to. You could look at guys who've played a lot of games, but most likely these are not going to be guys that have generated in for this. In fact, it's very likely that most of these players are in fact the ones that were already in existence, because the new guys have yet to exist until now, which really does make it very difficult to narrow them down in any conceivable way. Your best bet might genuinely be looking at certain attributes or something. World reputation probably isn't going to matter all that much, but you just never know. You might find the odd guy that's got randomly high world rep. Anything you can do that can isolate a few little groups of players that you can scout so you're only left with a couple of hundred rather than 1,500 is kind of what you want. So grab a few of those and get some reports. But there is another way to find these guys too. So if I go to one of the many divisions at this level in Spain, Segunda Federación Grupo 1, you'll see that we can access the season preview, and within that you get like a media dream 11. You also get a key players list on the side, and note there's a couple of regens in here. This guy Pedroza, who's also in the key players. There's also another guy here who I believe is a regen. I think that's it for this one, but if you were to just look through the 5 leagues, you'd also be able to find a couple of extra guys, and you can click on them here. They then show up on here. It looks like he isn't, but then you click on him and he actually is, and he's actually wanted as well by some rather large Spanish sides, so he's probably one to pay attention to. Sadly, you can't go team by team doing this, because even if you did find a player, they're not clickable in any meaningful way. It's so close to being useful there. Now, out of the 1,500 players, I've only got like partial scout reports on 69 of them at the moment, which you can see has taken a little while because we don't have that many scouts to allocate for it, but you can already see, ignoring some of the guys that are at the bigger sides. Now, I'm pretty certain a couple of these guys have actually moved to these teams already, but there are a few players a little bit further down, like this guy, for example, who may have something about, who's got 18 jumping reach. But I'd be willing to bet if I took a larger sample size of closer to 500 of these players, we'd absolutely find some monsters down here. It's pretty much inevitable at this point. So is it cheesy? Absolutely. Is it a single player game? Also correct, which means, hey, do what you like, right? You don't have to do it, but you can. And lastly, it brings us to the big daddy, team report scouting, where we have quite a bit to discuss, as you may have seen from very early in the video. If you've watched any of my content over the last couple of years, be it guides or streams, you'll know that this is kind of my bread and butter. It's my favorite thing to do because once you set it up, it's very easy to optimize and have it running in the background where you can just kind of go on with your day. Except, of course, in 26, where things have changed dramatically, and not for the better, unfortunately. But first, what is it? So basically, the main process is to isolate and figure out clubs that are producing good young talent, and then have the opportunity to get team reports on those clubs, be it on their first teams, as is often the case in Africa, where they only have the one squad, or under 19s, under 21s, or first teams of other nations, such as in Europe or in Scandinavia, which is still part of Europe, and of course South America. South America, you kind of want to do them all. The teams are found, of course, by looking through the youth national teams and just looking for any kind of clusters of teams, right-clicking, getting a team report. It's very, very fast and easy to set all of these things up and build up a big database of these over time. To actually find the list of those team reports, you go into team priorities down here. And as you can see, they slowly build up and you can add loads of them. And once you start continuing after that, around about 5 days later, the first team reports will start coming through. You get one per day, no matter what, no matter how many scouts you have and no matter how many reports you've got. So you may as well just assign them to your best scout because he's going to be doing it all anyway. But you'll want to build up a lot of these. That way, when they do come through, you can simply right-click on them, get team report, and send it back round again. See you again in 2 years' time. Then you use the vague outline of the information provided in those reports to triage the players down and focus your scouts in on a very specific set of players, rather than scouting hundreds of them. This was done using a view and some filters on the player database scouting screen once those reports started rolling in. It could narrow it down and only show the players that had been specifically found through those reports. And almost all of that methodology holds true in FM26. Except when we get up to the filters part, because as you see, the filters are broken, as we discussed earlier, and do not work properly. Meaning if I was to add the filters that I would normally use for this, which is the ability one, just to sort out any players we'd have unknown on, which obviously would not be these players, and then scouting, which is a number of days or days since scout report created, and then you have to set that is not between, but the problem is you set it between 0 and 999. But obviously there's only one box here because it's busted, which means, as you can see, this does nothing. And while some of the players on this list will absolutely be from your team reports, it doesn't isolate them by themselves. So you'll have lots of players coming onto here that very much aren't what you're looking for. Because I only took over like a month and a half ago in this save, there's not been a lot of scouting yet, which means that if there was, this would be full of absolute nonsense that you wouldn't be able to wade through. The reason this filter is important is because with those team reports, you get a vague estimation of their potential and ability, but the game doesn't consider you to have started actually scouting the players individually. And thus, the value that's assigned to that is not between 0 and 999 for this, and that's why they isolate solely those players. The other thing you can do following that logic is to go to knowledge as well and set is at least none, or at most none, rather, which would have the exact same logic because it shows up as none when you show it. Unfortunately, this filter doesn't work in any way either. It either shows all the players or none of them, no matter what variables you set it on. And believe me, I've tried everything. The reason I'm explaining this to you now, though, is so when it is fixed, you will know exactly what you're supposed to do, and it'll be much easier for you than the methods I'm going to have to show you today. But this should provide you with a giant list of all the players that were in those team reports over the last 30 days, and you can just look at their potential, pick any player out you like, get scout reports on there, and it will just constantly update them dynamically, because the moment you said scout report on that player, within a day, they'll be removed from the list because now you're officially scouting them as well. So it constantly updates itself. But of course, as you saw earlier in the video, when I imported my Cyrene save, it carried over the filters and they actually still worked from FM24 into 26, even though they were the exact same things. So clearly the code underneath works just fine. There's just something about the way that the interface is working at the moment that doesn't let you input them. So hopefully that means it'll be on the way to being fixed fairly soon. And that's why I think it will be. And hopefully we get the importing and exporting coming back too. So I can just put a big pack in the description for you to download. Because right now I can't do it. But that's enough about what doesn't work. We're not here to complain. We're here to offer solutions. So what are the two workarounds for the time being? The first of which is a little bit of a tedious task, but then they all kind of are at this point, which is where when the report comes through, you click this, it'll take you in. You'll obviously have to still go into their under 19s because it doesn't take you there. And then you can select all the players that you want, add them to a shortlist. In this case, I just did any of the regens because they're in this squad in the first place. And then go through and add all the players as they come through every day into a shortlist. Now, another thing that's broken is the fact that much like the original Recruitment Focus screen, despite us knowing this information, the ability and potential stars say unknown on squad pages, even though if you were to go to the player's profile, you see that we actually do have that information. So this will be even easier when that part gets fixed too. But you then add them all to a shortlist, and then you'll see something that looks a bit like this, where you can have a proper closer look at them at least. Some actually insanely good players in here, especially this Cedric dude. My goodness me. So that's one way of doing it, but it was a lot of legwork that you didn't have to do before. The other way around it is when you get to this screen, instead of doing the shortlist option, just literally hover over these and you will at least be able to see a recommendation from your scout in the bottom corner, which will give you some vague outline. And my advice would be to anyone who's rated sort of A or B, probably just get a right click on that player and get a scout report from there pretty much from the, report, and then like that. It's the best we can do for now, and hopefully you're watching this in a couple of months and this part of the video is completely meaningless, and do you know what? I cannot wait for that day. I want to see the retention graph for this bit be negative in a couple of months, alright? But thankfully, I'm in the early stages of my Wisła Kraków save over on stream, so this sort of stuff isn't really applicable to me just yet anyway, but just make sure that you're scouting within your scouting range, and you'll be absolutely fine if you can stomach doing all the extra steps for the time being. Whew, well, that about wraps it up. I have no idea how long this video is going to be, but I wanted to make sure I featured as much as I possibly could and went as deep as I reasonably could in certain areas, and I know there's a few areas we still want to explore still, especially the transfer room in stuff. That's intriguing me more and more after testing some stuff while recording this. So that is everything I currently know about scouting in FM26. Hopefully you found this helpful in some way. If you have, consider dropping a like, consider subscribing if you're new for more videos, guides, and weird nonsense coming up very soon. Follow on stream. Love you all. Hold your gun. Capybara. Bye-bye.